Hello again, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Facing the Nation. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, for the first half of our program, we're going to be focusing on climate change. But before I do that, first of all, let me apologize to our viewers. I know a lot of you would have sent us messages via social media talking about last week's program and the fact that last week we focused specifically on government business, and we seldom do that. And when I say government business, we brought to you last week the Minister of State's press briefing in its entirety, and often when we do that we just show you about 10 or 15 minutes of it, but last week you got the entire thing, and I know some of you are asking for that more often because last week you got to hear the questions posed by the journalists and the minister's response and so on. But remember, this program is also for other things, so we can't promise you a program every week where we're going to have the full post-cabinet press briefing. Unfortunately, there was none this week because there was a sitting of the National Assembly yesterday and there's another one today. So the Minister of State is obviously tied up dealing with what is happening in Parliament and so on. That is not to say that there wasn't a cabinet meeting this week. There was, as usual, but next week, or if not next week, when the post-cabinet press briefings return, you will get information from what would have been missed this week. So you can look forward to that. But for now, let's focus on what's happening at in a sense, the Office of Climate Change. It is my pleasure to welcome to the program for the first time the National Project Coordinator. He is Mr. Marlon Velloza, and he's the project coordinator of the TNC, and TNC is the Third National Communication. He'll tell you all about that. I know, and we were discussing this earlier, and sometimes when you hear about climate change and all of the technical language, we get a bit confused and we want to switch. But I'm encouraging you not to switch off because it has to do with climate change and what we can do and how we all can benefit. So again, I have the expert here with me, Mr. Marlon Velloza. Welcome to Facing the Nation.
Thank you very much for having me, Malika.
All right. It's great to have you. And I just want to jump right into it. And we were talking about this earlier. Why is it that it seems that sometimes when we hear about climate change and all the technical language surrounding it, we try to shy away from it? And this is not only as journalists or television personalities, but as a people, as citizens. Why do we tend to shy away from all of that?
Well, in my not so expert opinion, I believe it's a lot to do with the fact that it sounds very technical, and it doesn't really sound as if it involves the average person. I honestly believe that sometimes we, as a people, we're not necessarily that engaged in things that don't necessarily seem to have a direct impact on us as individuals, compared with some of the other issues that might be occurring in society.
Okay, all right. Even before we get into the explanation of it and so on, and before we talk about what citizens can do, why should citizens really be interested in what's happening with climate change and what governments, not only in Guyana but around the world, will do to, in a sense, minimize the effects of climate change?
Well, I think when we're thinking about or speaking about climate change, it is very important that you understand that it affects you, whether directly or indirectly.
Okay.
And one of the things that keeps coming up of late is what are the impacts of climate change on the populace. So we know that Guyana, majority of the country, I think about 90% or so, live on the coastline, and that area is below sea level. And as the seas heat up or the world gets hotter and the seas rise and sea level rises, or there are a number of threats to our livelihoods and ultimately our lives. So simply put, we can potentially die as a result thereof. So it's very important for you and I and everyone to be aware at least of how we have what role we might have to play in this whole fight against climate change.
Well, knowing we can eventually die is definitely a reason to pay attention to it.
Yes.
All right, let's get into the details now. A few days ago we saw, and I'm just going to use a random headline here, OCC, meaning Office of Climate Change, begins preparation for Third National Communication. What is the Third National Communication? What should we think of when we hear that? Explain.
Well, first I'll give you the more technical definition, and then I'll give you something that everyone can understand.
Okay.
Basically, the Third National Communication is the reporting requirement. Well, it's a series of communications, and this is the third one that Guyana is at, is a reporting requirement to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And what that simply means is that Guyana signed a treaty in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit that says that we're supposed to report on a number of criteria, including greenhouse gases, to this convention, which is the UNFCCC.
Okay, let's talk about the criteria. Where are we, if you're in a position to talk about that, what is necessary, what is required?
Okay, so the National Communications Mechanism, and specifically the third National Communication, has approximately 4 components. Well, 4 components that we have created in Guyana.
Okay.
Of course, all of these fall under the reporting requirements for national communications. So those components would include the greenhouse gas inventory, which, as the name suggests, is a register or an inventory of greenhouse gases. Those are the gases that affect the earth getting hotter. And then there is the mitigation assessment, and there's a report on vulnerability and adaptation assessment. And finally, there's a report on the National Baseline Assessment. The National Baseline Assessment is a combination of a number of smaller reports, which would include what steps Guyana has taken to improve climate change awareness. So this is a prime example of what we're doing and what we're trying to do. There's also the capacity needs of the country in terms of being able to combat climate change. And then there's also the aspect of what are the financial and technical limitations in our efforts to fight against climate change.
In saying all of this, because it really is a lot and it's a lot to do, are we in a position, and you know, as national project coordinator, are we in a position to take best practices from other countries to help us to fight, especially when we are facilitating such projects? Are we taking best practices from other countries?
Well, speaking only for the TNC, because I'm actively involved in such, there has been a number of efforts, at least recently, for us to take some of those best practices and lessons learned from other countries in not just producing the national communications, but also how to put in place or institutionalize, which is one of the buzzwords that you'll probably hear, the whole idea of greenhouse gas inventories and our efforts to combat climate change. So, for example, one of the things that came out of a recent training that I've had is that Ghana has been able to leapfrog their efforts as it relates to the UNFCCC's entire framework and the reporting requirements and so on. So we've been able to make some connections with the Ghanaians and try to understand what they've done and what they're doing. We also lean on some of our Caribbean counterparts for information exchange, and in so doing, it helps to build our capacity first as the Office of Climate Change and even so as a nation. Because as you know, coming out of these reports, they help with decision making. What are the decisions that we need to make in order to ensure that we can mitigate some of the impacts of climate change? Or if it were to happen, if we were to reach that dreaded, not, well, if you want to call it a goal, but it's the reverse of a goal, can't find the right word for that. But if we were to reach that place where the earth gets hotter by 2% over the next 2 or 3 decades, then how do we deal with such? You know, so it's all apply to not just strengthen our ability to report as per our obligations, but how we can impact policy that will ultimately help us to stay safe as a populace.
In terms of the national communication, so this might be a strange question, but how much have you been able to interact with people, and do you get the sense, and I know this is one of the means that you're using, but do you get the sense that people are understanding, you know, what you're doing, what the theme of itself, what the Office of the Climate Change is doing? And again, viewers, we're speaking specifically to the national communication.
Well, that is a very interesting question, and unfortunately at this time we haven't done much community outreach, at least to the level that we would like to do so. But I can tell you that the Office of Climate Change has been involved in a number of public awareness programs and have really been trying to work on strengthening their education and awareness programs for all projects or across all projects. What I have encountered, however, is a number of interactions with persons from various sector agencies. So you look at the sector as, for example, agriculture or forestry or energy, and then within those sectors there are various agencies that are responsible for doing different jobs, and when you take that into consideration, they all help to contribute to the TNC. So the GEA, for example, or the Guyana Forestry Commission, for example, all provide data that feeds in to the whole overall report for the TNC. So based on my limited interactions with persons that are working within those sectors, I've seen a very positive response. Okay. I've seen that there is some amount of enthusiasm, for not just for this project, but for all projects as it relates to climate change. And I would like to believe that it first starts with us, those professionals who are working within the space. We all have a responsibility to spread the message.
Okay, all right. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, my conversation is with the National Project Coordinator, Mr. Marlon Velloza, and he is the project coordinator of the 3rd National Communication. And again, it's all focusing on climate change and what is happening. And just to remind you, so that you won't be confused, climate change, there are different components and different projects and so on. And as we go forward, we'll try to get other project managers from different projects and so forth. I know most times any agency, department, or project that fall within the Ministry of the Presidency, you've grown accustomed to seeing that on Conversations in State, which is usually on NCN. But of course, you know, we had to put that program on hold to facilitate you FIFA World Cup fans. I'm happy to report that will soon be over, so you'll see Conversations in State returning. So these conversations and these interviews will actually be seen on that program. Marlon, let's talk about, we did already talk about the people and why we should care. Let's talk about now what they can do, how people can contribute.
Well, not to get too technical, I think one of the simplest ways that you as an individual or I as an individual can work on, well, assisting in the fight against climate change is to do some greening things, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
One such thing would be to take public transportation. As you know, cars emit a high amount of carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming. So simply taking public transportation means that you help in the fight against climate change. Turning your lights off when you're not in a room, or outfitting your home with sensor lights, for example, is another way of helping to fight against climate change. So there are very simple things that you can do that can help in this overall fight.
All right, let's talk about period of time, and of course you can clear it up here if I'm confused, because we don't want the viewers to be confused. The communication of itself, is there this particular third phase? Am I correct in saying?
Well, it's the third report.
Third report.
Right.
So is there a period that the publicizing of this should last for, or I should ask you, where is it at this point?
Okay, so we're about midpoint, or a little bit more than midpoint in this process. It is expected to be completed by March of 2019.
Oh.
And so it's a 3-year project that started in 2016 and goes until 2019. And it's co-founded between the government of Guyana and the
The third one of itself is a 3-year project?
The third one of itself is a 3-year project.
Oh.
So we had the initial national communication, which would have been submitted sometime, I think, 1996. Then there was a second national communication, which was submitted in 2012. And now we're on to the 3rd national communication, which will be submitted in 2019. Ideally, a national communication should be submitted every 4 years. And in between those 4 years, every 2 years, is like a mid-report called the biannual update report. So it's really a system where Guyana constantly keeps reporting on its progress to implement things relating to the previous national communication and where we are in terms of our efforts in combating climate change.
Are we at an impressive stage yet? Are we yet at an impressive stage, or?
I don't believe I'm qualified to answer that question, yes.
But I know the intention is always to get at an impressive stage.
Definitely.
All right. Because again, viewers, I know sometimes this is a difficult topic to wrap your heads around, but we all need to learn, because as the project coordinator said, and this is the truth, it affects all of us. Have I missed anything? Is there anything that you would want to say regarding this project at this point in time?
Thinking about it, I think we've covered the general gist of the project and what it entails. Just to recap, there are 4 main components. There's the greenhouse gas inventory, there's the mitigation assessment report, there's the vulnerability and adaptation report, and then there's what we refer to as the national baseline assessment. And this all feeds into what is considered the third national communication, which is the reporting mechanism Guyana is required to do under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you so very, very much for coming, and I know the public is a little more informed now, because instead of just reading and seeing the big words, we had a breakdown of it, and I'm happy that you talked about the fact that this is supposed to last for a certain amount of years, so people because really and truly, when you see TNC and you see third, people are thinking, okay, maybe this will just last for a month or two, and then we're waiting for the fourth and so on. So we're happy to have had you come here and break that down, and maybe when Conversations in State return, we'll also have you on that subsequently a few weeks from now.
It would be a pleasure to be here.
All right, great. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, you missed a great conversation, a very informative one with the National Project Coordinator of the National the Third National Communication. Of course, that has to do with climate change. You can tune in to our YouTube channel and my Facebook page a little later on in the day, and that's if you missed the conversation. You'll get it in its entirety there. What we'll do is take a quick break, and on the other side we'll have more for you. Stay tuned. All right. Thank you so very much for staying with Facing the Nation. Again, we're going to have a very brief program today because we just spoke with the person from the Office of Climate Change, National Project Coordinator of the National Communication, of course, regarding climate change. That basically has to do with all the requirements and where we are and where we should be when it comes to climate change in Guyana, and that's a project that is ongoing. So we're happy to have had him. So we want to say thank you very much to him, and thank you very much to the Office of Climate Change, because they have been doing an amazing job. They're everywhere, and again, these are things that we as Guyanese, we sit back and we don't fuss about them, and we don't try to inform ourselves until something happens that is not necessarily beneficial to us. So we're so very grateful that he came and he explained. Again, a short program today. You know what's happening, and you know what happens when there's parliament, especially when there are 2 consecutive days of parliament. Everybody is busy and everybody is caught up in what's happening there in the National Assembly, and we actually like it that way. We had a sitting yesterday, and most times these sittings go into the wee hours in the night. Sometimes they go after midnight and so on, even though I know it for a fact that the clerk and so on, the staff there at the Parliament, they would have tried to cut that down, and including the ministers and the members of Parliament and so on. But we had a sitting yesterday, and we're having another sitting today, so we're going to have a brief one for you. But before I begin to wrap up, I'd like to bring something to your attention. His Excellency, the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, during last week, and sometime this week, early in this week, would have received some criticisms from the media, saying that he has not met with the media as people believe, as often as people believe that he should have met with the media. Of course, as you know, most times on this very program, we give you reports and updates, and we announce to you when the president is going to be out of the jurisdiction and what he's out of the jurisdiction for. What I want to do, though, is to read to you a release that was sent out by the Ministry of the Presidency. This was sent out the day before yesterday. Yes, this was sent out on the 11th of July, more or less rebutting Starbrook News editorial, because the Ministry of the Presidency feels that the Starbrook News editorial more or less makes it seem as though the president is refusing to speak to or meet with the media. So I'll read this release from them, and I know some of you have already drawn your own conclusions, and you can do that, but the fact is the Ministry of the Presidency is on top of this. And remember, this was sent out on the 11th of July, responding to an article on that appeared in the newspaper on the 9th of July. So the Ministry of the Presidency rejects the malicious misdirection peddled by the Starbrook News' editorial on July 9, 2018, which seeks to falsely project the media as nuisances to the president. This cannot be further from the truth, since the president makes an effort as regular as possible to engage members of the media, particularly during public exercises. The assertion carried that the number of presidential press conferences is a lack of demonstration of accountability to the people is simply absurd. The ministry takes this opportunity to remind Starbrook News of the weekly post-cabinet briefings, which are held to update the media and by extension members of the public on deliberations and decisions of cabinet by the Minister of State, the Honorable Joseph Harmon, who is the chief spokesperson for government. And I think sometimes we forget that indeed, that really and truly Minister Harmon is the chief spokesperson government, and he comes weekly. I mean, cabinet briefings, post-cabinet press briefings are missed when we have weeks like this, or if the minister is out on assignment, out of the jurisdiction. But I did explain earlier that there is none this week because of two consecutive days of parliament. To continue with the release, this does not take into account the extensive speeches and publications produced by the president and the Ministry of the Presidency. The David Granger-led administration, since its assumption to office, has been nothing but transparent and accountable to the citizens, and in so doing has empowered the ministers of government to speak on their respective portfolios unabated. What is important to question is the motive of such an editorial. The Starbrook News, which champions itself as balanced and fair newspaper, deliberately ignores the numerous avenues through which information on the government's business are available, among them being the Department of Public Information and the Public Information and Press Services of the Ministry of the Presidency, which provide content on a daily basis. The Ministry of the Presidency uses this opportunity to reiterate the President's commitment to engaging the members of the media, whom he holds in high esteem, in an effort to provide accurate information to the Guyanese public. The head of state also remains open to requests for interviews in this regard. So that is basically a rebuttal from the Ministry of the Presidency, rebutting the editorial in the Starbrook News carried earlier this week, which would have been on the 9th of July, just giving information purposes. I know there's lots happening in our society and a lot of talk here and there. Social media is literally on fire now. I don't see the need to, because most of you know why social media is on fire. I just like to take this opportunity to remind us that as a people, especially the adults, and especially those of us who are influential, it is your obligation to behave as calm and as peaceful and as law-abiding as you possibly can, especially in the public. I'm not saying behind closed doors that gives you a freedom to behave bad or to misbehave. And we keep forgetting, and all of us as adults, regardless of how terrible our crime is or how terrible our infractions are, all of us slip up from time to time. I think what we need to keep in mind is that our young people are always watching. It is already out there. Most of us do it. And it's very uncomfortable. We talk about young people. Oh, they could not have gotten away with that when I was this age, and we like to. I don't know if it gives us a sense of some sort of authority as an adult or as adults to condemn our young people, but folks, keep in mind, and I'm speaking to all adults here, more specifically those of us, you know who, if you're influential, if you're an influential person in society, regardless of what business you're in, keep in mind, every time you attempt to act, and I'm talking to myself here too, every time you attempt to act, the young ones are watching, and these are the same young people that you and I like to condemn, and we like to say that they're the future. And if we keep mouthing that the youths are the future and we have to do things for them and so on, and we keep mouthing these things and it's not showing in our actions, especially the way in which we carry ourselves, in which we conduct ourselves, because they're learning from us. Some people refer to some of them as the lost generation, but I'm not going to do that, because the fact is, if you're a lost adult, how do you expect those younger ones looking up to you? And we need to also understand that being humble and exercising a certain amount of class does not make you weak, because I know the difficulty as a woman. There are times in certain environments you need to stand up strong, or else there are people, even sometimes your own fellow females, will take advantage of you. But you have to, there is a way in which it can be done. You have to learn to balance your strength still with humility and class, and it is possible and it is doable. So I just like to take that opportunity to remind us as citizens that, if you realize that you're heading down a wrong path and you're not exhibiting what you should be exhibiting as a productive adult, as a productive citizen, you need to take time, take stock of yourselves, take stock of your emotions, your own actions, and pull it back a bit. And I think we're in an era where social media is it's so easy for social media to get to us and destroy us. It has become like a firestorm, and unfortunately, some of us have allowed social media to control us, and that is bad. And I don't know how we're going to fix that, because this is the era of social media, so I don't think we can run from it. But it's just that we need to be cautious going forward about everything that we do. As I did say, I'm going to leave you early this week, and again, we want to thank the Office of Climate Change for contributing to our program. Remember to use the right channels in terms of media to ensure that you keep informed in government business and in business around you, because everything that's happening in this jurisdiction in our country, those things concern you, and even some of the things that's happening outside. But we're going to start at home first for now. Next week, I can tell you, we'll have Miss Marlon Vine. That's the young lady from the West Side. I'm a West Side champion, the Region 3. And she has done something really big recently, but I don't want to get into that too much. Most of you, it's been in the public domain already, but we're going to have her here live on Facing the Nation talking about that. Returning next week also will be the Deputy Mayor, Mr. Akeem Peter, who has been doing a lot of work in the last 2 or 3 months and so on, and he's going to tell you about what's happening in his own constituency, the Sophia area, and he's going to be telling you about what's happening in Georgetown. And those of you who follow him on social media would see that he's been doing a lot of work. So next week we're going to be focusing on those 2 young people that are doing great things for our country. For now, I am going to take my leave. Of course, this has been Facing the Nation. I remind you, be good Guyanese citizens. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And of course, everything that you do, ensure that the next day you can still hold your head up high. This has been Facing the Nation. Thanks for watching.